Robert E. Lee, Gallant Christian Soldier by Lee Roddy. Chapter 7, Rebel Yell. Richmond was tense after the 5 days of hard fighting at Manassas. Rumors were flying. Beauregard and Johnston have been thrown back. The North is winning a major victory, an old gentleman cried. Yes, I know, a friend said softly, and my son is there. Lee held himself apart from the tense crowds around the Spotswood Hotel. A telegram came, and Lee heard shouting in the streets. He learned that President Davis had wired, Dateline, July 21st, 1861. We have won a glorious, though dear-bought victory. Night closed on the enemy in full flight and closely pursued. The crowded streets of Richmond went wild. The South had won a major victory in the first important battle. Lee soon found that Davis's telegram was not fully correct. The enemy had not been pursued. The Confederates could have pushed right into Washington, but they did not. Lee showed his bigness of heart by wiring Beauregard, I cannot express the joy I feel at the brilliant victory of the 21st. The skill, courage, and endurance displayed by yourself excites my highest admiration. Congratulations were also in order for another old Lee friend, Thomas J. Jackson. He had picked up a proud name at Manassas. Lee heard the story as it went the rounds of Richmond. Before Beauregard's victory, troops had been breaking and running in all directions. General Bernard B. had rallied the stricken Southerners by pointing through the battle smoke and shouting, "There stands Jackson like a stone wall." B went down under enemy fire, but his troops rallied. They turned back to fight the Union, stirred by the sight of Stonewall Jackson. The name stuck, and Jackson became a Southern hero. But the victory price for First Manassas had been high. There were 2,000 Southern casualties. The North lost more. Rhee wrote his wife, "Do not grieve for the brave dead. Sorrow for those who are left behind, friends, relatives, and families. The former are at rest, the latter must suffer. The battle will be repeated there in greater force. I hope God will again smile on us and strengthen our hearts and arms." Lee probably heard another story going the rounds of Richmond after Manassas. Jackson ordered his men at Manassas to let the Yankees advance as close as possible before opening fire and charging with bayonets. Presbyterian Jackson had said, "When you yell, yell like furies." The rebel yell, born of Southern fox hunters' cries, had helped unnerve the boys in blue and turn the tide. Davis was concerned about the losses in the western part of the state. He sent Lee, without authority to act, to see if he could improve the situation against Union General George B. McClellan. With Walter Taylor and Lieutenant Colonel John A. Washington as aides, Lee rode into the beautiful Blue Hills of Virginia. "I enjoyed the mountains as I rode along," he wrote his wife. "The views are magnificent, the valleys so beautiful, and the scenery so peaceful. What a glorious world Almighty God has given us. How thankless and ungrateful we are, and how we labor to mar his gifts." Lee tried to bring peace to the squabbling Confederate generals by reasoning with them. He was a gentleman, soft-spoken and polite. Lee found it hard to pull rank and crack down on the bickering officers. Lee's great tactician's mind saw that the one-armed Loring, a veteran of Mexico, should be attacking the enemy. But since Loring wouldn't move, Lee gave in and allowed more troops to be given to Loring's command as he wanted. It was a serious mistake. The other generals took this as a sign of favoritism to Loring. Other commanders suspected a weakness in Lee. They began challenging his orders and strategy. But still Loring did not move, and Lee had no authority to force obedience. To make matters worse, it rained. The ground was saturated. "I cannot get up sufficient supplies for the troops to move," Lee exclaimed. It was quite cool, too. "I have on all my winter clothing, and I am riding in my overcoat," he added. The rain ruined the gunpowder, dampened the spirits of the men, and opened the way for sickness. Taylor wrote, "It is no exaggeration to say that one half of the army was ineffective. Measles hit hard among the troops." Lee wrote his wife of another problem common to the field and the civilian areas. "It is so difficult to get our people, unaccustomed to the necessities of war, to comprehend and execute the measures required. The people simply would not face up to the situation. There was no 90-day war. It was going to last a long time, and it was going badly for the Virginians in the hills." Lee was cheered by meeting his son, Rooney. He was now a cavalry major, cheerful and hearty, as his father wrote, but riding in the rain without his raincoat. Otherwise, there was little to brighten Lee's days in the mountains. One evening, Lee looked up to see a young officer snap a quick salute. "Major Rooney Lee was fired upon by Union pickets, sir, near Cheat Mountain. His companion, Colonel Washington, died instantly. Union pickets put 3 mini balls through his body." Lee's face drained of color. The soldier's words came quickly. "Your son's mount was shot from under him. Major Lee escaped on Washington's horse, sir." The officer turned and left. Lee sighed with relief. The officer faded into the night as grief over Washington's death hit Lee. The boy was the great-nephew of the nation's first president. Lee recalled the times he had knelt with the young officer in private devotions during the rainy days. Just about everything was going wrong for Lee. "Those on the sick list would form an army," he wrote. "They are also difficult to handle. They are the worse than children, for the latter can be forced." The mud grew worse, with reposts that mules died of exertion. A soldier announced, "Today, 2 mules pulling a cannon sank so deep in the mud that only their ears showed." His friends laughed, not knowing if they could believe him. 2 good things came out of the Western campaign. Lee found a horse he liked to ride. It was a Confederate gray, big at 16 hands high, and a joy to Lee. But the animal belonged to another, and so Lee only had the loan of the 5-year-old. Lee lost his shaving gear when the baggage wagon got bogged down somewhere. He had a black mustache a short time before, but his unshaven face took on a different color. "I have a beautiful white beard," he wrote to his wife. "It is much admired." The troops began calling Lee Mr. Robert, a kind of familiar title indicating the fondness they had for him. Soon this became Marse Robert, an even more friendly effort at hominess. It stuck, and soon Lee was familiarly known by the distinctly Southern nickname. The season was growing late in the mountains of Virginia. Decisive action was difficult before winter slowed all fighting to a halt. But Lee, without authority, suggested a strategy to give the Grays a good chance of victory. After personally scouting the enemy, Lee planned a surprise attack at Cheat Mountain. The September 12th assault, the first Lee had planned in the Civil War, failed because other generals did not keep their assigned tasks on time. The element of surprise was lost. It was, in a sense, Lee's first battle, and he was defeated, not by the enemy, but by his own officers. The blow was made worse when Lee dug in for a defensive action which he knew the North could not successfully overrun. The Union generals wisely also realized this and refused to fight. Instead, they slipped away. But Lee said, "The ruler of the universe sent a storm to discomfort a well-laid plan and had to destroy my hopes." The newspapers back home set up a howl, especially when a Western Virginian withdrew from Virginia and the South and formed a new state. Critics in Richmond said Lee should have been firmer with the officers of the Northwest Army, but Lee had tried to be the peacemaker, reasoning instead of ordering, with unhappy results. As October ended, Lee turned back to Richmond, where the newspapers were highly critical of him. He was pictured in print as evacuating Lee and Granny Lee. It was typical of Lee to suffer in silence, although Taylor could see that Lee was bothered by the unfair articles. The writers didn't know the facts.